AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Czymbor here with you on this Friday morning. Right now, joining us via the telephone is the author of a new memoir called You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio, My Wild Rock and Roll Life. She is a legendary DJ from the Philadelphia area in the 80s and late 70s. We welcome into the program Miss Anita Gevinson. Anita, good morning and welcome to the program.
Well, good morning to you and to all of your fans and listeners in the Boston area, where I loved working back in 1979.
Where did you work in 1979 in the Boston market?
I was in WCOZ.
What was WCOZ's format back then, and what did it become, since I don't believe those call letters do exist at this point?
They probably don't. I don't know what it became, but it was classic rock. We were supposed to be the new threat to WBCN. Of course, you know how that worked out.
Yeah, the WBCN had a dynasty for quite some time until they went away a few years ago, so they're no more as well.
But we went away a whole lot sooner. You know, I think that was pretty lame to think that we could take them down. But we tried. What could I say?
Maybe WCOZ...
But I had a ball living in Boston for a year.
Maybe WCOZ does exist, and I just know it under different call letters or something of that nature.
It's
Who knows?
Very possible. You know, the more things change, right, the more they stay the same.
Exactly. Once again, we're chatting with Anita Gevinson, a former rock and roll radio DJ whose memoir is called You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio. Do you miss doing morning radio at all? Because you were a staple in morning radio in the 70s and 80s in the Philadelphia market, but you also had a cup of coffee in the Boston market as well in 79. Were you mornings in Boston or no?
No, in fact, I came to Boston so I wouldn't have to do mornings. I was one of those people, I don't know how you do it, Peter. My hat is off to you. I could not get through those hours. The hours are brutal, as you know. And I was the girl that was out all night at every concert, never had to set an alarm clock. And that was the girl they hired. And then they wanted me to be fun in the morning. And I didn't find it fun. I having to go to sleep before everybody else. So I actually walked away from the morning show in Philadelphia and came to Boston and worked 6 to 10 at night.
See, I actually try to get some sleep here and there, but there are days when you sleep 1, 2, or 3 hours before you come into work. And this hasn't happened too much lately, though I did do it earlier on this week. You pull a complete all-nighter and you show up here at 4 in the morning just ready to go for work and just hope to barrel your way through it.
You know, you're so right, and it takes its toll. I used to sleep every other night with one eye open, because if you're ever really asleep, you're not going to make that, 4 or 5 o'clock call. There's just no way, and your body never gets used to it. And it sounds like we're complaining, and we're not. It's just that compared to the other DJs, it wasn't as much fun. So I never could make it work in the morning, and I am in awe of anybody that can keep those hours.
You'll learn the tricks.
It's where everything happens, though. You know, everything happens in the morning.
If you learn the tricks, keep the TV on if you don't go to sleep till after midnight and things like that, you can get through it.
You have to be pretty young, too, I have to say. I was pretty young when I used to do that, and I didn't feel any need to brush my hair.
You know, you throw on the sweats and you throw on the sweatshirt, and only if you have a big guest in studio do you actually shower and brush your teeth and get dressed correctly.
Exactly. Brushing your teeth is like, oh, did I do that, or should I go back? Oh, I probably would be late. No, you're absolutely right. I had a standard wardrobe of about 4 different outfits, and I wore them over and over again.
Did you ever keep deodorant at the station so that you could deodorize as soon as you got...
Of course, in the bottom of my purse, and you'd slip into the bathroom, do the roll-on, go back in. It was quite another time.
We are like-minded spirits right here, Anita. I can feel it already. You brush your teeth in the bathroom at the station. You have the deodorant and the prize draw. I like the way you're thinking so far.
And you have your dinner at 6 o'clock, and by 9 o'clock, it's over.
Exactly. Well, Anita, the book is called You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio. What inspired you to write this memoir, and how many fans say, well, we've mentioned Philadelphia 3 times at this point because that's really where you were well known. How many fans do you still have that remember who you were and have been interested in picking up this book?
Well, I was very shocked. You know, the more I looked back, the more I realized that not everybody very few people had the life that I had. It was a blip on the radar screen. It was over in about 10 years. But in those 10 years, I led a life that I could have never dreamed of. Growing up in Levittown, Pennsylvania, going to the local stores to buy the albums, being a kid in junior high that loved the Beatles, and then, you know, never, ever dreaming of being on the radio or being a disc jockey. And then finding myself in that position where not only was I meeting all of my rock and roll legends, but I was of the time, and it was the time in my life where I could date them, I could get to know them, I could travel with them, and I had a really good time on the radio. I had a very good response. Everybody loved the show. I think I'm still the only woman that ever did a morning show in a major market in a rock and roll format. So I was breaking rules. There was really no blueprint for a woman back then, how to be a DJ. And I just fell into it by chance, and then started having the time of my life. And when I looked back at those stories, meeting Bob Dylan and dating some of my rock and roll idols like Marty Ballin from Jefferson's Airplane, and then falling in love with Warren Zevon, where it became actually something that was I was going to marry him. I mean, my life was just crazy good for about 10 years. Of course, as quickly as it lights on fire, it does all come crashing and burning down. But for the time being, I had the time of my life. So that's why I decided I needed to put these stories out there while I could still remember them.
Now, you mentioned some interesting tidbits in your answer to that question just there, and I'm sure we'll get to a few of those as this interview progresses. But the 70s and 80s really seen as decades of decadence within the world of rock. What are some of the acts that came through your doors at the radio stations you worked at that really stand out in your mind as being memorable, whether they're memorable to the widespread masses or just you personally for the fun times that you encountered with them?
Well, the most fun I ever had in the studio was with Van Halen. They came in and they were crazy. We let them be guest DJ, and they started pulling all the albums out and throwing them around the studio, and I remember them telling an off-color joke on the air, and they were just crazy boys back then. And this was before I think they had one album out at that time. So they were really fun, but you could see that at any moment it could go really out of control. So it was like dangerous fun in the studio with Van Halen, if you could get through it. We used to have in those days no delay. We just never even thought of doing it. It was 2 turntables and a microphone, and you went on live, and you just took a chance. And I can remember the look on our program director's face through the glass saying to me, "Get them out of there before the FCC shuts us down," So they were tons of fun. And we always had fun with Hall & Oates. Hall & Oates used to come in, and they would play live for us. They would record anything for us. A lot of fun in the studio with Billy Squier. And that's how I would meet these guys. And they would ask me if I would like to come to the show. And then one thing would lead to another. Next thing you know, you're out to dinner with them. And back in those days, everybody didn't really know everything you were doing. It wasn't all over TMZ. People weren't taking photographs of everything you did. So you could basically just lead your own life, and they pretty much expected me to hang out with these guys, but nobody asked me questions, and nobody was married. There was no secret things going on. We just went ahead and partied every night. I think I went out every single night. Whoever came to town, that's who I went out with. And some of them came around again and again. I got to know them as friends. Some of them were just, a moment in time where 2 ships passing in the night, and I can still remember the fun we had. And some of them are friends to this day. So it was all good for me. I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't look at these men and think, "Ooh, husband material. I want to have a baby with him." There were those girls, but they weren't me. I was just living for the moment, and I didn't really have any negative experiences, which is very rare when you look back at your life. It was really, for a time, completely positive and fun.
So you were this hot morning female rocker DJ. The bands would come through, and they'd ultimately make an overture towards you in far more of a way of being not just a professional relationship of interview subject. They wanted to get to know you a little bit more. What are some of the more interesting encounters with people you had? And you mentioned you were even engaged to Warren Zevon at one point.
Yeah, I want to put this, I want to put this nicely. I would say that...
You didn't hear yesterday's show. You can put it however you want, and we'll just take care of it.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, I got to know all different kinds of men. They were all musicians, but that's really where the similarities ended. And I don't think in any other walk of life or in any other venue, you could be doing your daily job and that you could be able to just go from someone who, let's just say, was creative, a very sexually creative guy like Daryl Hall, and then maybe you would meet somebody like a Marty Ballin who was very romantic and was very old school and would sing to you and take you to dinners and, actually court you. Of course, he did have a woman that he lived with while he was doing this, but he was also, these guys, when they go on the road, all bets were off, and a lot of them had arrangements with some of the women in their life, and they were just being them. And I remember Billy Squier being completely opposite of who he portrayed in those videos. I was a little bit disappointed because I thought I was meeting one guy, but I was really meeting a very focused, very troubled guy that really couldn't relax and have a good time. And in those videos, he looked like he was having the most fun. So you just never knew. It was like a box of chocolates. You just never knew what you were getting into. I got to travel with Carl Palmer when he was with Asia, so I got to meet a lot of the really great musicians, that he worked with. There was Brian Lane that was his manager, who was an epic manager in those days. Almost, I think he changed his name so it could be like Brian Epstein. And I got to meet a lot of people and go a lot of places that I never would have even been invited to had I not been on the air as a DJ and had I not somehow had some sort of an attraction, and it was mutual with a lot of these guys. And they were all so cute back then. When I met Nils Lofgren, all right, now this is going to sound very strange to you, but I thought this guy was a consummate professional because during one of his guitar solos, he was able to take a little bit of a walk backstage, and while he was playing his solo, he would go to the bathroom in the trash can.
He was multitasking.
He was multitasking. Very impressed with that. I thought, now this is a real musician. And I happened to be with him when he got the call that he was going to be joining the E Street Band. So that was very exciting. We took him to the passport office, and we taught him I taught him songs, the difference between all the night songs and all the girl songs and all the car songs. And, it was an exciting time in his life, and he couldn't have been nicer or sweeter. And I never in a million years thought that he would become, the member of the E Street Band that, Bruce would look to after Steven Van Zandt left. But there you go. One day he's sitting in your living room, and the next day he's joining the E Street Band. And Bob Weir, I have to tell you, growing up, I was never a Deadhead. I didn't really get it. And when I met Bob Weir, I couldn't believe how cute he was. He didn't look like he should be in that Grateful Dead band at all. He looked like a yuppie, preppy guy. So when I met him and he asked me to come to the Grateful Dead show, I could not believe the people in the audience, the Deadheads. They would follow us. We would have to run down the hotel hallways to try to get to our room before they would be banging on the door all night. I mean, they just didn't give him a moment's peace. And I'm sure he loved it, but I lasted about 2 days with that circus, and I was like, get me back to my radio shows.
Now, do you keep in touch with any of these?
Different worlds that I was brought into that made it like a traveling rock and roll circus. And my real crazy life-changing moment came when I met Bob Dylan at a Bruce Springsteen show, and I was at the lowest of lows in my life. I had been fired. I'd made really bad career choices, and I'd found myself in Los Angeles with no job. My unemployment checks were about to run out, but luckily Bruce Springsteen was coming to town for about 6 shows, and I was friendly with the late Danny Federici and his wife at the time, so I could go to all the shows. I had my plastic pass, and one day I come back during the show after the intermission, someone was sitting in my seat, and when I sat down next to him and when the lights came up, it was Bob Dylan. So there's a great story in the book of how I managed to get Bob Dylan to give me life advice and career advice that paid off, and he was the reason I went back to Philly and became a great big DJ. So, yeah, I mean, things like that would happen to me like all the time, and I didn't even realize, I knew it was special then, but I was in it then, and it wasn't until I could get away from it a little and turn back and look at it to say, wow, I got to write these stories down. I got to talk about this life of mine because it's even hard for me to believe at times, actually.
Bob Dylan always struck me as a very introverted guy that would be hard to talk to in a social setting. You're telling me different, though?
Well, it was shocking to me because he came in and he does give off that demeanor, like, don't talk to me, don't look me in the eye. And he was not really interested in the Bruce Springsteen concert until Bruce started playing harmonica. And then he got interested, but again, not very engaged, and I would have never struck up a conversation with him. But surprisingly, amazingly, he turned to me and he looked at my pass that I was wearing and he said, could you take me backstage? And I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Bob Dylan was asking you for a favor.
Yes, and I said, but you're Bob Dylan. And the guy that he was with leaned over and said, yeah, but see, he doesn't think like that. So I said, sure, I'll take you backstage. So I literally grabbed his hand and led him backstage at the Bruce Springsteen show. People were, I mean, when people saw him, you would look on their faces, it was like they had seen, I don't even know what, the second coming. They were just, I mean, people were shrieking, people were patting him on the back, and he just was smiling the whole way. He loved it, took him backstage, and then I get up to the big, beefy bodyguard in front of Bruce's dressing room, and I say, Bob Dylan to see Bruce Springsteen. And he says, give me 20 minutes. And I'm like, no. You don't understand. This is Bob Dylan to see Bruce Springsteen. He's like, no, you don't understand. Give me 20 minutes. So I had to explain to Bob that Bruce needed 20 minutes, and he didn't seem to mind so much, but he didn't talk to anybody else but me. I don't know what made him feel safe. I don't know what made him do it, but I just took advantage of every minute I had with him and asked him advice for the rest of my life, and I've taken it ever since.
Outside of Bob Dylan giving you life advice, if you will, you mentioned many encounters that you had with many other rock stars who ultimately became your friends and even further during the course of your radio career. Did you ever keep in touch with any of the people you mentioned? You mentioned Daryl Hall, Bob Ware, Billy Squier, and characters such as thus far.
Well, I did see, yes, I have seen Nils. He's married and everything, and we wave to each other, from a Bruce Springsteen show. I haven't seen Billy Squier. I have seen Daryl Hall, but not lately. Out in Los Angeles, I went to one of his shows, and a whole bunch of Philly people came back and said hello. And yeah, it was very nice. And I saw Bob Weir again at some benefit, and he got angry with me because I said to him, "If you don't remember me, it's okay. It was a long time ago, and I know you met a lot of people." And he actually got angry with me, and I don't know if he was pretending or not, but he was like, "Of course I remember you. Of course and everybody, seemed to be very nice, and nobody seemed to mind that I had written the book. I haven't heard any negative responses. Of course, Warren and I stayed in touch, and unfortunately, there was a gap of about 10 years, and I did not get back in touch with him again until I heard that he was terminally ill. And it's one of my big regrets that we couldn't make that work and that I couldn't have been more with him, longer. But it was just one of those things where back in those days, it just didn't seem possible that rehab could work. I didn't think a person like that could go to a 2 or 3 week program and, sing Kumbaya and come out and assimilate into the world. And I was just afraid that he was going to come out and live with me and isolate himself. And I was afraid we were going to lose him on my watch. And I'll be perfectly honest, I really didn't think that I could keep him alive. And I didn't think I could keep my life together, taking on the burden of someone who was that ill. And fortunately, he did come out and he did get sober, but then he did get sick. So, it was just, I had so many mixed feelings about it. There were years where he wouldn't even talk to me, and I totally understood that because I broke up with him in rehab. So you can understand why he might have a problem forgiving me. But I was determined to get back in touch with him and just apologize to him. And then when he got sick, I was able to contact him, and we had a wonderful conversation where he made me feel, just as loved as I always felt. I mean, I always felt liked and lusted after by these other guys, but with Warren, I really felt loved, and it's something that I've never felt again to this day. I never had a love like that. So I don't know what the lesson is. I don't know if it's that you do have a love of your life or you have many loves of your life. I'm still trying to figure all that out. But he was quite a guy, I got to say. And for anybody that ever got to see him perform or knew him even casually, he was just something special. It was why so many people loved him. And I'm still getting gifts from him today because I'm still very close with the man who was his road manager. We're still friends, and I know Warren is, wherever he is, he's smiling on us knowing that, we're still friends. And I think a lot of the pictures in the book, when you see Warren and I together, you'll be able to see that there was really something going on there. My casual relationships, they were fun, and I'll never forget them, and some of them were the most passionate, some of the most exciting, but my time with Warren was really something different. I fooled around and fell in love.
How did you get involved with Warren Zevon to begin with, where you ultimately became engaged to him?
Well, this was also a very, very odd turn of events that I can't believe even happened. Even before I was a disc jockey, I went to the Main Point one night, which is a club that is right outside of Philadelphia that I had never gone to before. And the only reason I went there was because I was angry at my boyfriend at the time because he didn't want to go out. I always joke about I used to meet men who wouldn't come home or they wouldn't leave the house. I never could find somebody that had the happy medium. So this guy would not take me out on the Saturday night, and I decided to show him, and don't ask me what made me pick this concert on this night at this club, but it's just like they say in that movie Casablanca, I just walked in to that club and there he was. And Warren was actually someone I'd never heard of. He was opening for a bigger musician at the time, Steve Goodman. And when Warren came out, a lightning bolt literally hit me. 2 minutes into his first song, that was it. It was over for me. I can't even explain it. I just had to know this guy. So I went up to the ticket window after the first show, and I asked them if I could buy a ticket and stay for the second show. And Warren happened to come out of his dressing room and hear me begging the guy to let me stay. And he walked over to me and he said, "You'll be my guest, and I want you to come backstage after the show and tell me how you liked it." And that was it. That was pretty much it. And he was married at the time, so we did not get together right away. We saw each other a little bit, but then we realized that was not the right thing to do. So I guess that was 77. I guess not until 81 we got back together. He got divorced, and I had moved to Los Angeles, and I ran into him at a Bruce Springsteen show. And I moved back to Philly, never forgot him. And he called me one day out of the blue and said, "I've never forgotten you either. Do you want to go on the road with me?" And that was pretty much it. So he moved to Philadelphia because I had my radio show on WYSP, and he lived with me for almost 2 years. And during that time is when he went to rehab, and then he wrote 5 pretty significant songs while he was there, and then he was able to record Sentimental Hygiene, which a lot of people think is one of his best albums, right after that. So, yeah, it was remarkable. It was just something, it was like when I was with him, I felt like I had been with him since I was born. It was one of those crazy, crazy things. I don't know if you ever felt that way about anyone, but it's really quite remarkable, when it happens.
Once again, we're chatting with Anita Gevinson, author of You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio, My Wild Rock and Roll Life here on WXPR. Earlier you mentioned that you had some vivid memories of the guys in Van Halen early on in their career, playing guest DJ on your program, on your morning show, very early on in their career. Were you surprised that David Lee Roth tried to get into radio well after his tenure in Van Halen, even though he's back in the band at this point? And were you surprised that it didn't go so well after a few months? He was in it for a few months, and that was it.
Yeah. He's so visual, and I don't want to say that I knew, but I didn't think that was going to work. Being a DJ, and I know you get this, people think, because I guess we make it look easy, but it's really, we're not the performer. We almost channel the performers. We're not, I often liken it to a chef in a restaurant, spaghetti sauce has a couple different ingredients, all right? So stay with me here. But there are some people that can really make spaghetti sauce, and they know how to combine ingredients, and they know how to present music in a way that a chef can present food in a way that you feel like you've never tasted it before, and it's the same food. And even in the classic rock format, even though it was so repetitive, I always felt that I had a gift, or at least a talent, for putting music together in a certain way that it would really capture an audience. And then along with whatever I would say or think, I felt like I was echoing my audience, my listeners, so they felt like this was their radio show. But for a performer to step in and try to relate to a guy that's getting up, going to work every day, I don't really know if that's going to work. Especially I believe he was trying to take over for Howard Stern, so he was doing mornings.
So he was, and it was one of those things where
right?
it was one of those things in radio where you say, this guy's done a zillion phoners and a zillion radio interviews as the subject in his life, but just throwing him in there to do a talk show for a few hours every morning, you're really throwing him in a spot where it's baptism by fire.
I don't know who thought of that. I mean, there's a whole different wheelhouse of skills that you need to do what you do, and obviously, if you could look the part, just imagine you trying to do what he did. I mean, even for one song, even to get up there and sing a background vocal or whatever, what a fish out of water we would be. That's not what we do. We do not perform like that. We are the, we're the vessel that takes the music, and we're one stop closer to that artist, because maybe we'll get them on the phone and we'll speak with them. But we're more the audience than we are the artist by far, I think. And that was a bad thing and I think he probably would admit that, because he's just so Dave. I think he would admit that was a really bad idea. But people think what you do and what I used to do is easy, because we make it look so easy. You just get up and you turn on that mic and you either play music or you talk for a living. But it's harder than it looks, I think, if you're doing it right.
Now, David Lee Roth replaced Howard Stern at one point, as we just mentioned. You were on the flip side at one point. Many years prior, you were actually replaced by Howard Stern. How exactly did that happen?
Well, that was really a shock. That was 3 months after I had broken up with Warren in rehab. I had signed a big contract to go to the brand new station. It wasn't unlike what WCOZ tried to do to WBCN. WMMR was our WBCN. All of a sudden, a brand new station, WYSP, was going to challenge them. So they stole me from WMMR with the promise I would never have to do the morning show. And, of course, they reneged on that. But they stole me to come over to WYSP, and I had signed a big contract. And then I didn't know this at the time, and this is so typical radio that it's going to make you laugh. The management had never intended for me to keep the morning show, but they couldn't tell us that they had Howard Stern waiting in the wings. He had a contract. He was just starting syndication. There was a lot of legalities that would prohibit him from telling us that he was coming to Philadelphia. So we were pretty much going through the motions. We didn't know it, which I think is really a tragedy to do to somebody. You know, if they would have told me you've got 3 months, make other plans, I would have been more prepared for the rug to have been pulled out from under me, but they didn't tell me. So 3 months into it, I've decided to break up with Warren because at least I have my life, I have my job, I have my listeners. It won't be so bad. I'll get over it. They'll help me. All of a sudden, I keep hearing rumors about this guy named Howard Stern. I had never even heard of Howard Stern. And when I did hear about him and people described him to me, I got to be honest, I didn't think this had a shot in hell. I thought people would get tired of the negativity. They wouldn't want to have somebody be so mean. they would want to hear music. I thought, okay, give him a couple of months. He'll be gone. Well, you know what happened. It didn't turn out that way, and could I have been any wronger?
Well, all these years later, he is the self-proclaimed king of media, so he's doing well. WYSP in Philadelphia is still around, by the way. If you said that they were the news station on the block, they're still doing well to this day, correct?
Well, they were until I think it was about a year ago, when finally they gave in and they went sports. They're now sports.
You know, that's
sports.
interesting because I don't know if you know this, but WBCN here in Boston also moved down the dial to 98.5 and became a sports station.
Well, there you go. So what is that telling us, I guess? I don't know what that means. I mean, I don't like to hear that because I feel like, you know, the opportunities to hear music in all the different genres for free are drying up. And I don't think anybody should have to pay for radio. I mean, that's a terrible thing. I don't mind spinning through commercials. I get to hear what is on the other channels, you know. So I'm an old school girl. I like my radio instant, live. I don't want to have it all pre-programmed. I don't want to have the disc jockey sitting in his Brooklyn apartment with his home studio mailing in those back announcements. You know, I want the real thing, and it's getting harder and harder to find. So that's sad, I think. Don't you?
I think that's sad as well. But you know what? I do like the less limitations that satellite radio does have at times, especially...
Well, you're right.
And I say this to people as well. I equate this to another medium. What is the slogan of the New York Times? What is their slogan? It's all the news
that's fit to print.
All the news that's fit to print. What does that
Right.
really mean? It means all the news that's fit to print in between all those ads in their newspaper.
That's right.
Whereas if you go
That's
online
right.
or something like that, you have kind of an unlimited blank canvas to work with. And there's kind of some advantages to satellite radio and the internet that traditional mediums don't offer, but there's benefits to the traditional mediums as well, particularly legitimacy, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Living in the moment, being live. There are, you know, actually knowing who you're talking to, being in the same city. I think that matters. I think that you know what a great the city of Boston is one of the greatest music markets. I mean, come on. Chicago, Philly, Boston, really, right? New York isn't even as good. So you have savvy listeners that they have specific tastes that are regional. And when the cookie-cutter formats that come in, I mean, I'm on my soapbox now, but the cookie-cutter formats that come in across the country that proclaim to know what songs by what artists every city wants to hear, and then to think that it could be the same zip code to zip code, I don't understand, you know, who's making that decision. I certainly couldn't. You know, knowing as much as I do about music, living for music and living, you know, specifically to you know, my goal is to know all kinds of music. I would not assume that I could program music for every city in the country and that it could be the same just because it's something I like. So I don't know how that happened. You know, but they do it and they're very successful. And I think the audience should just demand more, you know, like, it's all about what you listen to. If you don't listen to it, it'll go away. If you do listen to it, it'll hang around. It's as simple as that, right?
Pretty much. And Anita, you made your mark in Philadelphia, spent some time in Boston many years ago, currently living in Los Angeles. What are you doing these days? Obviously, you have the book out, You Turn Me On, radio. You still involved in radio?
Yes, what I'm trying to do now is, and this is really a funny thing, I would love to be able to retire early and kick back and write the screenplay for my book. So I'm working out of Los Angeles. I'm sort of freelancing, and I'm doing some news. I'm doing some, you know, vocal things, voice work and everything. And pretty soon, and I never thought I'd be celebrating this, I will be so damn old that I'll be able to retire early and just go to concerts for the rest of my life and write my screenplay and, you know, enjoy my life. I can't believe it's actually happening, but if the government can just produce my checks, I'll be okay.
Well, we look forward to all that is in the future for your life. And I want a part in the movie, Anita, okay?
Seriously, you must. We can cast you as one of my evil program directors, and you can play against type.
I would love that. That would be fantastic. That's Anita Gevinson, author of You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio, My Wild Life in Rock and Roll. Any final words for our listeners before I let you go this morning, Anita?
Well, I do want to tell everybody that they don't even have to bother to go out to the bookstore to buy this. You can go right online. In fact, you can only go online to Amazon.com and buy it. And if you have a Kindle, it's really inexpensive. And I really think that if you are looking for even to put this book in your bathroom and just open it up anywhere and just start reading and laughing and flashing back to those times where maybe it wasn't the greatest times in terms of, what we didn't know, but boy, did we have fun. So anybody that has parents that were rockers, this is a great gift for them, or anybody that thinks they remember the 80s, it's a great book for them. So Bruce Springsteen fans, Grateful Dead fans, Warren Zevon fans, I think you'll all really enjoy it. So take a look and check it out.
Head on over to Amazon.com. The book is You Turn Me On, I'm a Radio, My Wild Rock and Roll Life. Anita Gevinson. Anita, thank you once again.
Thank you. Hello, Boston.
You've been listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. We'll step aside for a quick break. Mike Pava brings us a local news update. Stay with us.